historian here at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, and I do appreciate you all coming out this afternoon for this program that the National Military Park is conducting this weekend to recognize the 158th anniversary of the Battle of Chickamauga, the events that hallowed this ground that we stand on. And in particular, we'll be talking about some action that occurs along the general battle line that is developing on September the 19th, 1863. Now, in that year, the 19th of September was a Saturday, so we're off by one day, but we will be talking about action that occurs on the afternoon of September the 19th. This program will start out here. It'll be about 2 hours in length and about 2 miles of walking out and back. Although with the heavy rain this morning, I may have to make a last-minute modification because we do have to cross one drainage. And crossing the drainages this morning was not much of an issue, but we have had a lot more rain since, so we may have to do part of the program walking the line, then coming back here and moving the vehicles down and going into to a spot via a route on the other side of the drainage. But I did not have time between moving and setting up signs between the program this morning and this one to walk down and check the drainage there. So we may have to adapt and overcome a little bit depending upon what we find. In particular, in this program this afternoon, I want to talk about the experience of a young Confederate artillery officer by the name of William Watt Carnes, C-A-R-N-E-S, a young Tennessean, known to his friends as Will, and he had just turned 22 on September the 18th. He came from a prominent West Tennessee family, and his father had used their political connections to get young Will Carnes an appointment to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. And he had entered the Naval Academy in Annapolis when he was 15 years of age, just before turning 16, that summer of 1857. But having had a good education prior to going to the Naval Academy, he did well and was looking to graduate in the spring of 1861. However, as you all know, as 1860 passed and 1861 approached, things in this country were looking rather squally. There were stormy seas ahead, and indeed, with the election of Abraham Lincoln in November of 1860 and South Carolina's secession just a few weeks later, the world is about to change. And that was certainly the case for Carnes and many of his student comrades at the Naval Academy, and some of them began to resign in early 1861. But Carnes, driven by his the training he'd received from his father, having done well, Carnes was very desirous of seeing where he would stand in the final ranking. And at that time, at the Naval Academy, there were a series of examinations in February of the graduating class's final year that would rank the students by class order. And so Carnes, unlike many of his fellow Southern friends, Carnes stayed at Annapolis until after the February examinations, so he could find out that indeed he was number 4 in the class. But he resigned before he actually graduated and returned to Tennessee, which, as many of you all know, has a different path to secession than many of the other Southern states. And when he returned home, his father, not wanting him to get caught up in all of the political turmoil then going on in Tennessee and in Memphis, his father suggested that he should go to law school. And he actually entered the law school of Cumberland University in Lebanon, Tennessee, in the spring of 1861. But that did not last long. With the firing on Fort Sumter in April, and Tennessee's Declaration of Independence on the 6th of May, 1861, and they beginning to organize the Provisional Army of Tennessee, Carnes, with his military training, likely could find a spot in the new Tennessee Army, which in July begins to be transferred to the Confederate States of America Army. And he offers his services to the state, and given his training at the Naval Academy, he is assigned to the artillery. Now, at that time, the students at the Naval Academy were trained in some infantry as well as land artillery tactics, because they could potentially also be Marine officers or landing party officers. As Carnes relates, they actually studied more infantry and land artillery tactics than they did naval artillery tactics. Only one day a week did they practice the naval tactics. And so he has a good background in artillery, and he is assigned to a battery which is reorganizing, a battery which predated the beginning of the war, a volunteer military organization in Memphis known as the Steuben Artillery. It was made up mostly of German immigrants to the Memphis area, but with the secession of Tennessee and Tennessee joining the Confederacy, many members of the Steuben Artillery had decided that their foreign birth would be a good way to avoid actual military service. And so many of the members had resigned, and the Steuben Artillery was being reorganized with new officers as well as many new members. And in fact, the number of Germans in the battery will continue to diminish. But Carnes becomes one of the young lieutenants in that battery, and after the battery commander, William H. Jackson, is promoted, Carnes will become the captain and battery commander. He will take the battery to Shiloh against orders, and participate in some of the final action at Shiloh. Will participate at Perryville and at Murfreesboro, but now, here in September of 1863, his battery is attached to the division commanded by the hard-fighting, hard-drinking Tennessean Benjamin Franklin Cheatham, a man who, after the war, at least, will endorse Jack Daniel's whiskey. And if you are a collector of Jack Daniel's products, there is actually a very collectible early Jack Daniel's bottle which has a portrait of Benjamin Franklin Cheatham on the label. The Carnes' battery is attached to Cheatham's division, and as Bragg maneuvered his army to hopefully get in between the Union Army trying to get back to Chattanooga and the city of Chattanooga to the north, Cheatham's division on the morning of September the 19th, will cross West Chickamauga Creek at Dalton's or Hunt's Ford to the south, and will be marched up first with the idea of supporting the attack against Lee and Gordon's Mill. But as the battle that we know begins, the battle that starts at Jay's Mill on the morning of the 19th and flows south into this area, Cheatham's division of 5 brigades, the largest Confederate division on the battlefield, is sent north to join the fight. And coming along in the column with the 3rd Brigade of Infantry is Carnes' battery of 6 guns. Of 4 guns. It had earlier been a 6-gun battery. But Cheatham marches up to the north, and he will deploy, initially being told that he is supporting other Confederate troops who are engaged, and he will deploy his division with his right flank across the Alexander Bridge Road that you turned off of to come to this program, and with 3 of his 5 brigades in the front line. The division will stretch southwestward for a mile from the Alexander Bridge Road. And on the right is the Georgia and Mississippi Brigade of John K. Jackson. And one of the things we'll do in this program is get some sense of just how broad the front of Cheatham's division was. So we're going to leave here now, and we're going to essentially, we're not quite on the right of Jackson, but you can see it from here. We're going to walk across the front of Cheatham's division and down towards where Carnes' battery will be engaged on the left of Cheatham's division. Questions or observations? He is attached to Wright's Brigade, Marcus J. Wright's Brigade, and I'll say more about that as we get down on that section. As we go along, we'll start out walking on the paved road here, and we'll transition to a path in the grassy field, then a trail into the woods. And as I say, we do have one drainage to cross. We'll have to see what that looks like when we get there. All right. Field, but I do want to point out today that the Civil War Brock Field was much larger than what you see today. In fact, we would be in Brock Field right now if it had its actual Civil War dimensions. The field went up to nearly to the crest of the rise where we started out, and stretched westward. So all of this area immediately on our left right now would have been part of Brock Field at the time. This little drainage that we're going to cross runs north and south, and it was actually in the field at the time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they didn't send the draft or anything. You gotta read it.
Along the front of Cheatham's division, going from his right towards his left, we've now walked through the section of Jackson's Mississippi and Georgia Brigade. They are attacking Federals in the woods there on our right as we walked along. We've now reached Brock Field, which I've already identified went further to the east at the time, and in fact from here about 100 yards further to the east, and it was much larger to the south. Take this distance from the Brotherton Road there to the tree line now, and add that same distance on the other side of that tree line. There was a thin strip of trees here because of some drainages, but then there was the field, the open area began again. And it actually extended further to the west down there. I'll show you roughly where the western edge of the field was in 1863. But one of the things this open area does allow is some sense of that developing battle line. As Cheatham's division engages, first Jackson's brigade, and then in this area, Preston Smith's brigade, and they confront Federals who are marked by these monuments that we have been walking along. The 124th Ohio Monument, the 41st Ohio Monument ahead of us, and you can see the Confederate line marked by these smaller markers. And we'll be walking along a series of those, and as Cheatham came up and engaged Federals in his front, the Federal line extended southward as well, but Cheatham has so much frontage that the Federals actually have to bend back so that eventually they are parallel with the Brotherton Road. And we're now going to be walking around the end of this bend towards the left. As the Confederates come up and find the Federals deploying, they have to bend around as well. And Preston Smith's troops here in this field actually have to start curving around to the west to confront the Federals in their front. And on this map you can see roughly how much larger the field was. So we're going to continue on now towards the left of the line. The stone was relatively well chosen, and once they could see them clean, they looked nice and fun.
Where is it? Is it our granite, correct?
No, they're the Tennessee marble.
Where is it from?
Right offhand, I don't remember the name of the quarry. Well, it is getting warm, but I'm already wet. So.
Into each other.
Yeah. There's no hand-to-hand fighting, but let me answer that when we get gathered up here. Along the monuments that mark the battle lines, they seem awful close to one another. The fighting was at a little greater distance than is suggested by the monuments. It actually surges back and forth across the field here. The Confederates first advancing across the field as Hazen's brigade comes up, push the Confederates back, then the Confederates push Hazen back a little bit, so it will surge back and forth. And so the monuments are kind of on the furthest point of advance of each of those lines. There's not any recorded hand-to-hand fighting along this line, although there is some on other parts of the Chickamauga Battlefield. This field is known as the Brock Field, and the Brock farmstead, the buildings, were just in the woods here, kind of this little point of the woods there. They're one of 3 Brock families on the battlefield. And we would basically still be in the field, even though we're going to be entering the woods. So this would have been open, largely open ground at the time.
Never mind.
That's not too bad, so just be careful of your footing.
No.
Thank you, sir.
You go by Fulton's warehouse.
Yeah.
Okay, take it that way.
There we go. That has been fun.
Well, I saw like one over there. I heard seen it before.
Edge of Brock Field. So all that area between where we entered the woods back there from the field to here should be part of the field. And that helps explain why Battery B, 1st Ohio Light Artillery, is right here. Because what would they have actually been shooting out into? The field at the time. So they were not in the woods. So now we enter the woods on the west side of Brock Field. Brigade commanded by Marcus J. Wright, a prominent Memphis, Tennessee businessman. Is made up of the 16th Tennessee, the 8th Tennessee, the 28th Tennessee, 38th, excuse me, the 51st and 52nd Tennessee, the 28th Tennessee, and the 38th Tennessee. As they march forward, they are the 3rd Brigade in the division column. And so when they are told to deploy and go into battle formation, Wright believes that the 2 following brigades, George Maney's brigade and Otho Strahl's brigade, will deploy on his left. So as he advances, he believes that he has 2 brigades to his right and 2 brigades to his left. But he had not entered the far side of Brock Field very far before all of a sudden he realizes there's nobody on his left, because Cheatham has ordered the other 2 brigades to continue marching north and form a second line behind the first 3 brigades, Jackson, Preston Smith, and now Wright. And so Marcus Wright all of a sudden starts to get worried because he's advanced across the southern end of the Brock cornfield, and now he's advanced into the woods, and how far can he see in any direction? He's driving some federal troops back in his front, but there is concern about the flank of his line. The commander of the 16th Tennessee will write of their initial advance. The line of battle having been formed, we advanced, changing direction slightly to the right through a cornfield and a short distance into the woods beyond, when we found ourselves under a very heavy fire from a battery of the enemy. Remember, we just passed the marker to Battery B, 1st Ohio Light Artillery there. About 150 yards in front of my left wing. The fire wounded a considerable number of my men who retired from the field, and at the same time a number of others fell back 10 or 15 paces, seeking protection behind trees. This, for a moment, induced the belief that the line was giving way, but the men maintained their position, firing as rapidly as they could through the thick undergrowth, which much obstructed the view of the enemy, for about 3 hours, when I received an order from Brigadier General Wright to retire, which I did. They're going to fight on this line for about 3 hours that afternoon. But now we enter Wright's brigade, and we're now walk across part of the front of the brigade. Following along behind the brigade as they advanced was Carnes's battery of artillery. But there's each of his 4 guns are drawn by a team of 6 horses in 3 pairs. And with the gun attached to its towing vehicle, the limber, that entire unit is 14 yards long, and it is multi-jointed. And what kind of terrain are they moving through? Wooded terrain. How difficult do you think that that might be? And in fact, as they come forward, Carnes will write in a memoir later, the woods were so thick here that we could not see as far ahead as the enemy's line, and it necessitated that they get a little help to get through that thick terrain. On each one of the limbers there was an axe strapped. And Carnes has to direct his men to take the axes off of the limbers and cut some of the smaller trees to make a path through the woods for his battery. He also is expecting to go into position in the middle of the brigade, but he is held up by the terrain, and now the brigade is in contact with the enemy just to the north, behind me, in front of you all. So we're going to continue to walk down the length of the brigade line here from the 16th to the 8th. I think we may have, there's not anything solid there, Landon. So, I think we may have to.
You can bring Ogden.
This trail connects to one on the other side, and it would then loop around to come into Carnes's battery from behind. So, well. It has been improved a little bit for this program issue, so it's one we've used with some of the staff rides over the years. So I think we better go back and try looping around and coming in the other side. Well, I guess I better wait. Just will suggest we do is we get our vehicles, and mine happens to be the one at the end of the column now, so I'll have to jog down there, get my vehicle, and we will go down the road here about half a mile and stop where we can go down a trail to the Carnes battery site, and we'll come at the muzzles of the guns instead of the breeches of the guns. So if some of you all have had enough and you decide that this is a good time to escape, you can just continue on Brotherton Road beyond muddy spots along the way. We'll have to go along. We shouldn't have any rivers to ford on this route. So just watch your footing as you go along. So looks like this first part might be the the most, we're going in differently, but we might as well take advantage of the fact that making note of these monuments that we're walking along right here, they come into play with the story of Carnes. So we started out parked along the road here. We walked down and walked across the field, and then walked here, and we got to where you see the blue line here. That's the drainage that stopped us. We were in Wright's brigade, and so we've walked back to our vehicles. We've driven along the Brotherton Road, and we've now stopped right along in here where you see on the map Gross's brigade. A couple of the monuments that we passed were for Gross's brigade along the road, and now we are walking south down here to the left end of Wright's brigade. The Lafayette Road is out here. The Poe Field is there in that direction. You hopefully heard the sound of the artillery piece. Well, they're over across the Lafayette Road in the south end of the Dyer Field, kind of due west of us here. So we're now going to come in on the left of Wright's brigade from this side. So.
And Brotherton Cabins.
Brotherton Cabins in that direction, right? So we're almost out to the Lafayette Road. In fact, if I am quiet and the rain's not too heavy, can you hear cars on the wet Lafayette Road? That's how close to the road we are. So. All right, here we're looking at the side of the vehicle, so we probably wouldn't see any headlights, but so we have just a short distance to go further before we turn off. I should say, we have reached the Carnes battery site now. Now, for right this second, I've walked you through the battery, and I've got you facing this way, because if we had been able to cross that drainage down there, we would have come up this path right here. And down here a little ways, I would have started interpreting Carnes even more specifically, and I'm going to do that now, but we're not going to be quite walking it the way that that he would have moved it. So we're now at the Carnes battery site, and I'll answer Landon's question since he's asked it. The states that had troops here were authorized by the law creating the National Military Park to erect monuments. So the states had to come, or the monuments had to come under the states. And in this case, not only did the state of Tennessee erect the small stone monuments that you see right here to Carnes's battery, but the veterans of Carnes's battery said they would like to have a bigger, better monument than just that small marker. And so they, and Carnes at age 22 in 1863, you might imagine that he lived a little while after the war, all the way to 1932. So Carnes, he is fairly successful after the war, and so through all of these associations, the veterans of the Carnes battery are able to provide the money for this more elaborate monument that you see here in front. Most Tennessee regiments or units here only have the state-provided marker, but the 25th Tennessee in Bushrod Johnson's brigade, or Fulton's brigade of Johnson's division, they have a separate monument as well up on Snodgrass Hill that too stands in front of the state-provided marker. So if other Tennessee regimental veterans organizations had been organized enough and could have raised the money, they could have put up another marker too under the state auspices. So that's how we wind up with two markers here for Carnes.
Would it be possible for
additional states or organizations to add monuments today?
No more Tennessee ones could go up because Tennessee had their chance. They acted on it, and they did. Yeah, they put some monuments up. But there are a couple of states who might still be eligible to erect monuments here. Virginia is one. Louisiana is another. However, there is evidence that Louisiana may have considered erecting monuments here and chosen not to. And if that were the case, that needs to be checked in the legislative records a little bit more. Well, I haven't done it in a number of years. It might be more online now, but it was going to take a trip to Baton Rouge to rule that out finally. But so Louisiana may not be able to because they they chose not to. But Mississippi, Arkansas might be able to.
Georgia?
I'm sorry?
Georgia?
Georgia has monuments here.
What can they add?
No, they couldn't add because they established their system and they've had their chance to erect monuments. So there was a group in Virginia very interested in commemorating the Virginia units in the Army of Tennessee here at the Battle of Chickamauga, and they approached the National Military Park, and we said, well, the monuments can only be erected under the authority of the state. And so they were able to get, they had influence with the state legislature, and they got designated to be the state's agent to erect a monument to the Virginia's troops in the Battle of Chickamauga. And then they got the estimate of what it was going to cost. And I know Mr. Christensen has been released from cardiac intensive care, but that is where that effort died. Doing a monument like this one today would the cost would just be unbelievable. Mainly because there is no one who can do that work anymore. And so you're going to pay the very few people who are capable of doing it are able to command anything they want for it. So it's unlikely that there will be more monuments here on the battlefield. All right, so back to Carnes. So if we had been able to continue, we would have come on along the brigade line some. Then we would have looped around. Well, Carnes has got his men with the axes hacking down trees so they can get through the woods. Well, Carnes originally thought that they would be deployed just like they normally were and as they practiced, on the brigade line, in the center of the brigade. But as they move forward through the woods, they find that no space is being left for them on the front line. And the woods are tangled. And so Carnes, he also finds that the brigade is veering a little bit to the left. Carnes now angles to the left himself, still looking for a place on the line to go into action. And as he goes further and further to the left, he's not finding a place on the line. And eventually, he realizes he is here at the left end of the brigade. The 38th Tennessee, their little marker, is just up here in front of the guns. And Carnes said, and now enough time has passed that the 38th Tennessee is actually starting to fall back. The left end of their line is threatened. They've been in battle for a while. So Carnes says he's going to go into action here. To get into action, the four guns are now moving forward properly spaced. He orders the battery to basically turn left, and now the four guns are going one behind the other behind the battery line, and they actually come over here to the left end or end of behind the brigade line. They actually come over here to the end of the brigade line. But now the Federals are almost directly in front. To go into action, he simply commands another left turn. All of the guns now turn to the left, and they're now at the proper intervals. And they start to unlimber. And so the left gun of the battery will unlimber, and then each of the other four. And so now I'll turn you around, and you can be in the battery. So they come along this way, and now he's commanded left turn again, and they've turned in that direction, and now he commands in battery. And so the drivers of each team of 6 horses pulling the limbers simply halt the vehicles. The gunners step to the trail of the vehicle, hook to the limber, undo the linchpin, and lift the trail off of the hook and drop it on the ground. And quickly, all 4 of the guns are in place. But now they need to immediately get into action. Ideally, what should happen is the limbers should drive forward, turn around, and come back, so the noses of the horses are just 6 yards behind the guns. But to do that, it's going to take some time. And so they immediately go into action with the horses pointing in that direction, and the crew members start opening the limber chest to get ammunition out. Well, the gunners on the left gun, the 12-pound field howitzer, gunners on the right gun, the 12-pound field howitzer on the right of the battery, they open the limber chest, and the crew member, the number 6 or 7 man, reaches in there to pull out a round, and it won't come out. He pulls again, it won't come out. Soon the other man, 6 or 7, reaches in there, and both of them are trying to get the round out. They've been traveling so much in the last week or so, bouncing up and down on the dry, hard roads, the ammunition has wedged itself in the limber chest. And as they are doing this, Federals are now in their front and firing. And Carnes says that as the men are working in the limber chest, trying to get the rounds out, Yankee bullets are hitting the inside of the limber chest, and they're being fired from such a short range, they have enough power to go through the board of the limber chest and out the metal covering on the top of the limber chest. He said, turning the limber chest into a giant grater. And amazingly, none of those men working in the limber chest became a casualty. The bullets just went right by their heads. Well, one of the horses on the right team becomes a casualty, becomes frightened, and all of a sudden that team starts to run away, and it bounces over a root and overturns. And guess what it did? It freed the ammunition, and the crew begins to serve the gun from the ammunition that's been spilled on the ground. The horse panicked with a driver by the name of Marshall on its back, continues into the woods. He's now dragging the upside down limber, but it bumps over a root and actually turns back up again, and the panic-stricken remains of the team just carries the limber to the rear.
The rider's still on there?
The right Marshall is still on the back of one of the wheel horse. So the other crews get their guns in service, and the commander of the 2 right guns is the first lieutenant of the battery, First Lieutenant Lucius G. Marshall, and Marshall, as he watches his men firing canister at the Federals at just a short range in front, turns and yells to Captain Carnes, "This might be a good time to shoot that extra canister we've been carrying." What he is referring to is something that had occurred back in the summer of 1861, when the battery was being first organized. They had received ammunition from the ordnance the ordnance operation in Memphis, which was just beginning to operate. It was kind of an ad hoc organization. Well, the battery commander at the time, William H. Jackson, and Carnes were both professional officers. And Carnes said he noticed that some of that canister they were getting from the Memphis arsenal did not seem right. It didn't feel right. It was too heavy. And so Jackson ordered Carnes to examine it. And he actually opened the tin cans, which are supposed to contain 27 iron balls. And instead, he found 125 or so 69 caliber round lead balls in each one of the cans. The reason it weighed more was lead is denser. The balls are smaller, so there could be more in the same size can. Well, they bring this to the attention of the Ordnance Depot that the ammunition or the canister has not been prepared correctly, and the Ordnance people say, okay, we'll fix that. So the Ordnance people come, and they don't collect the canister, they only collect the powder charges off of those canister rounds, because powder was actually harder to get in the Confederacy than the lead or iron was. Well, now Jackson and Carnes are left with a whole bunch of canister rounds with no powder charge, and they're full of those lead balls. And so they decide to have a rack made on the front of each one of the limber chests where the footboard is for the crew members if they are allowed to ride on the limber chest. And they put those canister rounds in that rack. And these canister rounds have been carried in that make-do rack on the footboards of the limbers through Shiloh, through the Kentucky Campaign, and Perryville, and Stones River, and the retreat to Chattanooga from Tullahoma, and now their abandonment of Chattanooga. And now Marshall says to Carnes, this might be a good time for that canister. And they begin loading cans of those 69 caliber round lead balls on top of the normal canister round for a 12-pound field howitzer and a 6-pound gun, and firing that. Wonder if archaeologists would find a bunch of 69 caliber round balls out there in front of this position.
So it was double canister.
They were firing. Now they're firing double canister. Yes, they're firing these tin cans full of 69 caliber round lead balls on top of the normal canister round of iron balls for 6-pound guns and 12-pound field howitzers. But as the action goes on, Carnes realizes that not only are the Federals getting in closer in front, but he also gets word that they're approaching the left of his line. Now, remember earlier I said that Wright thought that Maney's brigade and Strahl's brigade would be on their left, but weren't? Well, Carnes, when he's moved over here to the left of Wright's brigade, he's been concerned about this as well. And Carnes has sent his first sergeant, Phineas White, who had been transferred to the battery from the 5th Tennessee. He sends First Sergeant White out to the left of the battery to look to see whether there's any approach of Federals. And White comes riding rapidly back to the battery and reports to Captain Carnes that indeed the enemy is closing on the left of the battery. That's some of these Union troops whose monuments we have been walking along as we've come down this alternate way. Carnes, realizing that with Federals closing in his front, with Wright's brigade falling back, and now Federals closing on his left, that he's going to have to get out of here. He orders, ideally, to make the withdrawal, he would have the bugler, an Irishman, who's been standing right by his side the whole time. He would have the bugler sound cease fire. But what would the Yankees hear? The ceasefire command. And so he says, not to the bugler, don't sound ceasefire. Instead, sound assembly. And he sounds assembly, and each gun detachment starts to form up behind their gun. But Carnes orders the left gun detachment under Sergeant John Thompson, a 12-pound field howitzer, because Carnes has organized his battery with the 12-pound field howitzers on the flanks of the battery, the left or the right and left gun, with the 2 6-pounders in the 7th. But he orders Sergeant John Thompson to keep his crew at the gun. It's the German detachment of the battery. It's the remains of the Steuben artillery. And he orders this gun to shift to turn the gun to the left to be able to fire at the most dangerous approaching Federals. Some of the crew members have already been casualties, but the gun has been loaded, and a corporal who's also an artificer within the battery, a German by the name of Rue, is serving right at this moment as the number 4 man on the gun. He has the lanyard connected to a friction primer in the vent of the gun, and he has just stretched the lanyard taut, and he's waiting for the command from the gunner or from Sergeant Thompson to fire the gun. And just he has the lanyard stretched taut, all of a sudden a Union mini-ball comes in and shatters his right hand. In the process, he drops the lanyard. His right hand now is too badly injured to grasp the lanyard and pull it and fire the gun. But he turns around, picks the lanyard up with his left hand, stretches it taut again, and with an oath fires the gun into the closing Federals. Carnes soon gives Thompson the order to withdraw, and Thompson's detachment begins to withdraw as well, and they're having to go off in that direction because they've got Federals closing in the front and Federals on their left flank. Their only escape is to the right, and it was as if he said they were going out the mouth of a V. The Federals are close on both sides. Thompson, as a sergeant and detachment or chief of peace, he has a horse, and the horse has been tied to a tree just behind the gun. And Thompson steps to his horse and goes to swing into the saddle of the horse, and just then he's struck by a mini-ball and killed. Carnes, who had dismounted as well, had tied his dark bay or brown horse, Prince, a very fine Kentucky-bred animal that he was widely known for in the Army. It was such a high-grade animal. He had been offered a large sum of money for the horse. Carnes makes it to Prince, and he sticks his left foot in the stirrup, and he swings into the saddle, and just as he takes the saddle, a Union mini-ball strikes the fleshy part of the hip of Prince, and Prince is started. And Carnes is able to guide Prince enough that they go out towards the right of the battery, but they're headed straight towards a fallen tree. But one of the things Prince was known for was his jumping ability, and Prince took the tree and kept right on. Carnes and the last of his crew members get out the right of the battery, and they go back to where they find Wright's brigade rallying. And as Carnes slows and rides in amongst the rallying men of Wright's brigade, one of the infantry soldiers said, "Captain, that horse is going to fall." And Carnes, just as he became cognizant of it, one of Prince's front legs collapsed, and Prince fell forward and onto its right side, and Carnes was able to jump free of the animal. Prince's last ride for Captain Carnes. Carnes looks around. Some of his men are around. He orders one of his men to capture one of the horses that have been cut loose from the other teams. They take the harness off of that team horse, and Carnes takes his saddle and tack off of Prince and throws it back on this team horse. And Carnes then will ride that team horse the rest of the battle. His servant Charlie and his other horses are back with the wagons well to the rear. But with Carnes' departure, the battery is now right for the Federals to overrun, and they will. And as the Federals come in amongst the guns, they have captured a Confederate artillery battery on the battlefield. But all around where the battery was lay dead horses or badly injured horses of the teams of Carnes' battery. There were dead crew members and wounded crew members as well. And the Federals will capture some of the crew members. And as you can see on the tablet, out of an aggregate of 78, one officer, Lieutenant Van Vleck, was killed, 37 men killed or wounded, and 49 horses killed. In the first detachment, the dead horses from the gun limber that had been cut free before the remaining horses had carried that limber to the rear were also joined by the 6 horses of the limber of the caisson, because when it realized that the gun limber had gone to the rear, when they tried to withdraw, they ordered the caisson unhooked from its limber, and they brought that limber and team forward to try to save the gun. But as that limber came up, it was shot down by the Federals, and the nose of one of the lead animals of that team died with its nose on the trail of the gun. How close they had gotten to potentially getting the gun hooked up and off of the field. In most battles, the artillery takes relatively few casualties, but in this battle, several batteries suffer severe casualties, largely because of the terrain in which the battle unfolds. Carnes is suddenly confronted by Federals directly in his front and to his left. That converging fire is what's going to be the real cause of the casualties within the battery. Carnes, though, is a very active young man. He orders Lieutenant Marshall to round up the remaining members of the battery and the equipment that had escaped, a couple of caissons, find that one limber that had run off to the rear, and Carnes goes to report himself to Benjamin Franklin Cheatham. As he is riding that way, he rides up to Preston Smith, a fellow Memphian. And Preston Smith is well aware of Carnes and his famous horse, Prince. And as Carnes rides up to Preston Smith, Smith asks where Prince is. And when informed that Prince had been killed, Smith said, "You should have accepted the offer I had made you for that horse." Smith asked Carnes what he was doing, and Carnes said he was going to report to Cheatham. And Smith says, "My battery, Scott's battery, is in need of an officer. Scott is absent, and the man who had been commanding the battery has become a casualty. And so Carnes volunteers to act as the commander of Scott's battery. That only lasted overnight. The next morning, Captain Scott arrived, and Carnes then will serve on the 20th as a staff officer to Cheatham in the final phases of the battle. But what had happened to Carnes' battery attracted attention. And even on the 20th, Confederate officers, as the battle line has moved a little bit further to the west, Confederate officers have ridden in amongst this scene. Some of the guns are still here. The Federals did not get all of them off of the field. Some of the caissons are still here. There's the spilled ammunition. There's the dead horses. There's the pile of 10 or so dead horses at gun number 1. And that day, or the day after, Braxton Bragg is even shown the remains of Carnes' battery on the field. When Carnes next sees Bragg, Bragg is impressed by Carnes' fighting spirit, and Bragg orders that his chief of ordnance, Olodowski, to make good Carnes' losses and to improve Carnes' battery. Not just salvage the guns that they had been using, but provide Carnes with better guns, 12-pound Napoleon. And Bragg orders that they be inscribed Chickamauga, 1863. Now, I haven't figured out whether or not they are Union guns captured here that are given to Carnes, or whether they're Confederate manufactured guns which are then inscribed that way. I think, though, they are probably Union guns captured here that are inscribed Chickamauga and given to Carnes. And if that is the case, one of them may be on a monument in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So there is a 12-pound Napoleon there, inscribed Chickamauga, 1863. Carnes will get new guns for his battery in October, but making good the losses in men, 37 out of 78, that's going to take a while. The battery has a full set of equipment by the time of the battles for Chattanooga, when Carnes is serving as an artillery battalion commander and will help stop Sherman's assaults on Missionary Ridge at Tunnel Hill. But the battery under Marshall is not engaged because they don't have enough men to serve their guns. Carnes, though, having had experience now as an artillery officer, but also having been trained as a naval officer, takes the invitation to transfer to the Navy. And he will in early 1864 and serve out the war in the Confederate Navy. And this battery then will be under Lieutenant Marshall until captured right at the very end of the war. But Carnes' troubles here is very reflective of the nature of the Battle of Chickamauga, fought in this wooded or forest environment. And a battle where, because of that terrain, the artillery takes a much higher casualty rate than on typical battlefields.
So in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20, but should he have deployed or just held his fire? I mean, just...
Well, you know, when he first deploys and he's firing to the front, and that's where the threat is that's causing Wright to withdraw. So no one knew about the threat coming in on the left. He had the presence of mind to send First Sergeant White out to see what might be coming in on the left. So,
Do you know how many guns he lost in total? You said that he didn't lose them all. Right?
No, he lost all 4 of them, at least initially.
But then...
But then the Federals only get probably 1 of them off the field. And when Stewart's division attacks here a few minutes later, they will recapture most of the equipment of Carnes' batteries.
Is this the Kirksville?
No, that's Scoggins, Georgia battery. these guns were well, the Steuben artillery had these guns even before the war, one of the things I'd like to try to do some more research on is can we track these guns? Now, it is possible that the ones that the Confederates recapture are sent to Augusta, Macon, or Columbus and actually melted down to help cast new 12-pound Napoleons, but so they may not actually survive. But yeah, I'd like to see if I can track them a little bit, and maybe the Carnes' original guns are amongst some of the surviving artillery pieces somewhere in the countries. Carnes, as I said, lived until 1932. And so he lived for basically the first 40 years of the National Military Park. And guess who was a fairly frequent visitor to the National Military Park in its early days? Captain William Carnes. And here he is in the post-war period, about the time the National Military Park would have been created, and he would have been making his visits here. And when he first came to this site, he was not happy. The Park Commission had not put his guns on the field correctly. He wrote the Park Commission, and he said, I had my battery formed with the howitzers on the flanks. And the Park Commission said, thank you for the information. We'll correct that. And so not only do we have the right type of guns, but we even have them in the right order as Carnes had them on that fateful days.
You may have mentioned this. What did he do after the war, and where did he go?
He enters the insurance business, and he lived. Well, during the war, at one point he was sick, and he recuperated in Macon, Georgia, and there was introduced to a fetching young lady, who after the war he made his wife, and he spent quite a few years in Macon, and then he returned to Memphis for a while, and then to Florida, and basically lived out the last years of his life in Florida. But when he died, his body was taken back to Macon, and he is buried in Riverside Cemetery in Macon.
And the inscribed cannon in Oshkosh, is that just at a Union memorial?
It's at a Union monument, yes.
Yeah.
Is there any record if they fired all that canister they've been carrying?
No, they don't get that many rounds off before they're overruns.
How do they train horses to stay that close to the cannon?
Well, a mule will tell you that that's not hard to do, because a horse is so dumb that you can train it well enough to stand there while these humans are shooting at one another. But it takes a lot of training. But horses being pack animals can be trained to do that. And there are a number of accounts from the Civil War that said that artillery horses were so well trained that they themselves knew the bugle calls. And so when the bugler sounded battery front, the horses would start to react even before the drivers could start to react. And then long before I had read enough Civil War to have seen those accounts multiple times, I remember my mother saying that she and her brothers and sisters, growing up on the Fairfax County, Virginia dairy farm, that in the 1930s, that at the end of the day, the horses knew when it was quitting time. And at the end of the day, they did not have to drive the horses back to the barn. The horses knew it was time to go to the barn, and they knew the way. And so the kids just sitting up on the wagon, it was just a ride for them. So I can see how potentially that could happen, but it takes a lot of training. But when the bullets start zipping by the noses and the ears and impacting the sides, that training's going to go away.
Isn't it pretty rare to have these artillery pieces come through the woods during this?
Yeah,
battle?
oh, very, very rare. That's another thing that makes this battle so unique, so different. That you have the artillery trying to fight like normal in this terrain. And for the military groups that I do staff rides for, I'll talk about this some because it's an example of needing to always evaluate where you are operating and your weapon systems or your munitions. Because in some environments, the terrain can neutralize the effects of a given weapon system. And that certainly is the case here. Now, by September the 20th, particularly on the Union side, there are lots and lots of artillerists and chiefs of artillery who realize this is not a good place for artillery, and they are being much more careful about where they are putting the artillery.
But at the time of the battle, the landscape is pretty much what Carnes was looking at.
Well, you would have been able to see 150, 200 yards down through the woods.
Okay. Yeah. It was wooded, just more lightly.
Right.
Wooded.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, he's in the woods since they left the Brock cornfield. He's been in the woods, and where he had to cut the vegetation with the axes was probably the first part of going into the woods from the cornfield, where because the cornfield has been created, the vegetation gets more sunlight, and you get more stuff sprouting. So.
Did you have a lot of cattle in the woods, kind of keeping things thinned
Right,
out?
you did. Yep, that's how the woods have the open character largely. So, cows and pigs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're probably getting near the end of our time, particularly given our we didn't lose too much time because we would have had to have gone back that way anyway, but we should to make our way back up to the Brotherton Road.